They thought they had me. A bright orange violation notice was slapped onto my front door like a final warning, bold letters screaming, "Immediate HOA fee increase $500 per monthly. Violation, excessive vehicles on property. $500 a month for parking my own cars in my own driveway." Catherine, the self-appointed queen of our HOA, had been looking for an excuse to come after me for months. But what she didn't know, I wasn't just another homeowner. I was her worst nightmare. Because while she played the HOA dictator, I played the long game. I owned more of this neighborhood than she ever realized, and she was about to find out in the worst way possible. Before we proceed, give this video a like, comment and subscribe to support this channel. I never wanted a war. I bought my house in Willow Creek Estates 5 years ago, thinking it was a quiet, peaceful place. It was a nice neighborhood, tree-lined streets, well-manicured lawns and friendly neighbors. At least that's what I thought. Until I met Catherine Monroe. Catherine wasn't just the HOA president, she was the self-proclaimed enforcer. She walked the streets with her little clipboard, measuring grass, snapping pictures of parked cars, and handing out fines like they were Christmas gifts. For the first few years I stayed under her radar. I paid my dues, kept my lawn trimmed, and attended the occasional HOA meeting just to stay informed. But then life happened. I run a small construction business, which means I need my work truck. My wife, Emily, is a nurse who works long shifts at the hospital, so she drives an SUV. And last month, we bought a used Honda for our 16-year-old daughter, Megan, her first car, a proud moment for our family. 3 cars. Parked neatly in our driveway. Not on the street. Not on anyone else's property. Just ours. But Catherine didn't care. She showed up last Tuesday morning, smug as ever, her pink clipboard clutched in her claws as she snapped photo after photo of my driveway. My blood boiled as I watched her from the kitchen window. My hands clenched into fists when she smirked, peeled a bright orange notice from her folder, and slapped it onto my door like she was marking her territory. Violation, excessive vehicles. I stormed outside, tearing the notice off my door. "Catherine." She turned, fake surprise plastered across her face. "Oh, good morning, Mr. Carter. I trust you've seen the notice?" I waved the paper in the air. "You're fining me for parking in my own driveway?" Catherine's lips curled into her signature condescending smile. The HOA regulations clearly state that no home may have more than 2 vehicles parked in the driveway overnight. I scoffed. "That's ridiculous. Half the neighborhood has 3 cars." She didn't even blink. "Rules are rules, Mr. Carter. If you can't abide by them, perhaps this isn't the right community for you." That's when I knew. This wasn't about cars. This was about control. Catherine didn't like me. Maybe it was because I never attended her mandatory HOA luncheons. Maybe it was because I never sucked up to her like the other homeowners. Or maybe, just maybe, she saw me as a threat. Either way, I wasn't backing down. What Catherine didn't know, what no one in this neighborhood knew, was that over the past 5 years, I had been quietly buying up properties in Willow Creek Estates. It started small, just a few houses when the market dipped, all under different LLCs to avoid attention. A smart investment strategy. But now, I own 62% of the neighborhood. And Catherine had just declared war against the landlord of her own kingdom. I folded the violation notice, tucking it into my pocket. She had no idea what was coming. I knew Catherine wouldn't stop at one violation. That bright orange notice was just her opening move, a warning shot in her petty little war against me. So I wasn't surprised when just 3 days later, I found another violation taped to my front door. This time it wasn't just about my cars. It was a full-scale attack. Violation 1. Improper vehicle storage, $500 per month. Violation 2. Lawn discoloration, $300 fine. Violation 3. Unauthorized exterior modification, $700 fine. The total? $1,500 in 1 week. I gritted my teeth as I scanned the list, my fists tightening around the paper. The lawn discoloration? A small patch of grass near my driveway had dried up during last week's heatwave. The exterior modification? A new mailbox I installed, identical to my old one but with sturdier metal. This wasn't about community guidelines. This was personal. I looked up just in time to see Catherine Power walking down the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, her signature smug grin stretched across her face. I wasn't the only one suffering under Catherine's rule. That afternoon, I took a slow walk around the neighborhood. I stopped by Mrs. Johnson's house, an elderly widow who had lived here for over 20 years. She looked exhausted, rubbing her forehead as she clutched a letter in her shaky hands. They fine me again, she sighed. This time for having a flower pot that's too close to the sidewalk. I frowned. How much? $200, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Next, I passed by Mr. Chin, the high school science teacher. He was crouched by his front lawn, staring in disbelief at a notice about improper hedge trimming. They're saying my hedges are half an inch too tall, he muttered, shaking his head. Half an inch, Carter? I nodded. Catherine? Who else? The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were targeting people. People who couldn't fight back. People who weren't in Catherine's inner circle. And I knew exactly how this worked. Catherine's friends, the ones who attended her wine nights and praised her leadership, never seemed to get fined. I'd seen it firsthand. Her best friend Susan had a purple fence that violated HOA color regulations. No fines. Her neighbor Bob had 4 cars in his driveway, just like me. No violations. Catherine wasn't enforcing the rules. She was weaponizing them. And it was time to turn the weapon against her. That night, I pulled out my laptop, a stack of property deeds, and a thick folder filled with HOA documents. For the past 5 years, I had attended every single HOA meeting, just not in person. Instead, I had sent proxies, hired representatives who owned the properties I secretly controlled. And during those meetings, I had collected everything. Minutes from HOA decisions, financial reports, violation records, emails between board members. Everything I needed to expose Catherine's selective enforcement. And more importantly, everything I needed to take her down. I pulled out my phone and made a call. Mark? It's time. Mark was my real estate attorney, and for months, we had been preparing for this moment. The plan was simple. Use my majority ownership to call a vote against the HOA board. Expose Catherine's corruption with hard evidence. Overturn the ridiculous fines and restrictions. But first, I needed one last piece of proof. Catherine had been stealing. I knew it. Mysterious HOA fees. Maintenance costs that never seemed to be used. And if I could prove it, her little reign of terror would crumble in front of the entire neighborhood. I smirked as I opened my email. A few months ago, I had hired a forensic accountant to dig into the HOA's books. Now I had the results. And what I found was worse than I ever expected. Catherine thought she was untouchable. 4 years she had used the HOA as her personal kingdom, slapping homeowners with unfair fines, enforcing rules that only applied to people she didn't like, and pocketing HOA funds without anyone daring to question her. But her biggest mistake? She came after the wrong homeowner. And now I had the proof to bring her down. The email from my forensic accountant, David, sat in my inbox, the subject line almost glowing with promise. Fraud alert, HOA financial discrepancies urgent. I clicked it open, my heart racing as I scanned the report. $50,000 for community pool repairs, but the pool hadn't been touched in 5 years. $12,000 for landscaping improvements, but the only thing that had changed was Catherine's personal backyard. Multiple emergency funds, withdrawals totaling $75,000, but no records of where the money had gone. Catherine wasn't just a control freak. She was a thief. And now, I had receipts. I dug deeper into the files, scrolling through HOA meeting minutes and email exchanges. That's when I found the smoking gun. An email from Catherine to the HOA treasurer, dated 6 months ago. Make sure the pool repair funds are approved this week. We'll reallocate later. Keep it quiet. She wasn't even subtle about it. I let out a low whistle. Gotcha. With all the evidence in hand, it was time to set the trap. Step 1. Call for an emergency HOA meeting. Step 2. Ensure a full turnout of homeowners. Step 3. Expose Catherine in front of everyone. I sent out a formal request to the HOA board, citing urgent financial concerns. According to HOA bylaws, if a majority of homeowners demanded a meeting, the board had no choice but to hold one. And with my majority ownership, Catherine couldn't stop it. The night before the meeting, I took another walk around the neighborhood. I saw Mrs. Johnson sitting on her porch, staring at yet another violation notice, this time for her unapproved bird feeder. I passed Mr. Chin, who had given up fighting and was trimming his hedges for the 3rd time that month. Catherine had kept this neighborhood in fear for far too long. But after tomorrow, everything would change. The community center was packed. Every seat was filled, neighbors shoulder to shoulder, whispering among themselves. Some looked nervous, others angry. Catherine stood at the podium, smug as ever, tapping her sparkly pink gavel against the wooden surface. Let's get started, she announced, barely glancing at me. First item on the agenda, continued violations for Mr. Carter's excessive vehicles. I stood up, cutting her off. Actually, Catherine, I have a more important matter to discuss. Her eyes narrowed. You're out of order. I smirked. No, I'm not. According to HOA Bylaw Section 73, any property owner may raise a financial concern for immediate discussion. Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line. Fine. Get on with it. That was her second mistake. Because I wasn't just going to discuss it. I was about to bury her with it. I walked to the front of the room, placing a thick stack of documents onto the table. Catherine, could you explain where the $50,000 in community pool repair funds went? Silence. The color drained from her face. What are you talking about? She scoffed, but I could see her hands tightening around her clipboard. I tapped the document. According to HOA records, the funds were withdrawn 6 months ago. And yet, I clicked the projector remote, flashing an image of the rundown pool onto the screen. The pool hasn't been touched. Murmurs spread through the room. Catherine shifted uncomfortably. Well, there were unforeseen delays. I clicked again. The next email appeared on screen. Catherine's message to the treasurer. Make sure the pool repair funds are approved this week. We'll reallocate later. Keep it quiet. Gasps erupted. Catherine froze. Mrs. Johnson stood up. You stole from us? Catherine stammered. That's taken out of context. I clicked again, flashing bank statements showing thousands of dollars funneled into unspecified HOA expenses, right around the time Catherine remodeled her backyard. The room exploded. Are you kidding me? She raised our fees while using our money for herself? We demand answers. Catherine's smug expression was gone. She was cornered. And I wasn't done yet. The final blow. Catherine banged her gavel, desperate to regain control. Everyone calm down. These accusations are completely baseless. I folded my arms. Then you won't mind a formal financial audit, right? Her face turned pale. Because she knew what that meant. If we audited the HOA's finances, every single misused dollar, every stolen fee, every fake expense she had filed, would be exposed. Actually, I continued, turning to the room, I'd like to take this a step further. I propose a vote to remove Catherine Monroe from the HOA board effective immediately. A murmur ran through the crowd. Catherine's eyes widened. You can't do that. I smirked. Actually, we can. I held up a final document, the official property ownership breakdown. It listed every property owned by my investment LLCs. 62% of the neighborhood. I locked eyes with her. I own the majority of this HOA now. And we're done playing by your rules. Catherine's mouth fell open. She had spent years ruling this neighborhood, controlling it, fining people into submission. But now, she was finished. The neighbors erupted into applause. One by one they raised their hands. In less than 2 minutes, Catherine Monroe was officially voted off the HOA board. She had lost everything. Catherine Monroe had ruled this neighborhood with an iron fist for years. And in a single night I took everything from her. She had been voted out, humiliated in front of the entire community, and exposed as a fraud and a thief. But people like Catherine? They don't go down without a fight. And I should have known she had one last dirty trick up her sleeve. The moment the HOA meeting ended, Catherine stormed out, heels clicking furiously against the tile floor. I watched as she shoved open the doors, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a lifeline. She's not going to let this go, my wife Emily muttered beside me. I nodded. I know. The neighborhood was buzzing with a mix of excitement and anger. People stood in groups talking about what had just happened. I can't believe it. She was stealing from us the whole time. I always knew she was crooked. But while the community celebrated her downfall, I knew better. Catherine wasn't done. She was too arrogant to accept defeat. The very next morning, I woke up to an email from the HOA's legal team. Subject: Immediate legal action, HOA property ownership dispute. I clicked it open, my stomach tightening as I read. Dear Mr. Carter, we have been informed that your recent acquisition of HOA properties may have violated local housing ordinances. Additionally, your role as a majority stakeholder is under review due to potential conflicts of interest. I gritted my teeth. Catherine had lawyered up. She was trying to challenge my ownership of the neighborhood. Emily walked in, sipping her coffee. What is it? I turned the screen toward her. Catherine's trying to sue me. She blinked. For what? I exhaled slowly. For winning. Catherine didn't just go the legal route. She turned to the court of public opinion. By mid-afternoon, I started getting messages from neighbors. Catherine was going door to door spreading lies. She's telling people you're going to turn the neighborhood into rental properties. She says you're planning to sell to big developers. She's telling everyone you want to destroy the HOA completely. I laughed dryly. She's really panicking, huh? But inside I knew what she was doing. She was scaring people. For years, Catherine had used fear to keep her power. Fear of fines. Fear of retaliation. Fear of being kicked out. And now, she was weaponizing that fear against me. Later that evening I got another email. This one was worse. Subject: Emergency HOA meeting, property sale proposal. I read through it twice. Catherine had convinced enough people to demand an emergency vote. She was trying to sell off HOA-controlled properties to an outside real estate firm, one that just so happened to be run by her nephew. She's making her last move, I muttered. If she can't run the HOA, she's going to burn it to the ground. Emily frowned. Can she do that? I clenched my jaw. Not if I stop her first. I needed one last decisive blow to end this war. So I called my lawyer. Mark, I need you to file a cease and desist against Catherine Monroe, today. On what grounds? He asked. I smiled coldly. Harassment, defamation, and illegal financial dealings. I had enough evidence to prove that Catherine had been mismanaging HOA funds for years. And if she wanted a legal battle, I'd give her one. The next night, the HOA gathered for one last showdown. The room was packed. Catherine sat at the front, looking confident again. Smug even. She thought she had won. She tapped the mic. This meeting has been called to discuss the future of Willow Creek Estates. Given recent developments, I propose that I stood up. Before you go any further, Catherine, I have some documents to share. I walked to the front, setting down a thick folder. Inside this folder are financial records proving that you've been siphoning HOA funds into your personal accounts. Catherine's face froze. I flipped the folder open. We have documentation of missing funds, illegal withdrawals, and even a fraudulent contract you signed with your nephew's real estate firm. Catherine's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I kept going. I've also filed a formal harassment and defamation suit against you for spreading false information about my property holdings. Catherine's hands gripped the podium. This is a setup. He's lying. I held up the email she sent the treasurer about reallocating funds. The room exploded. You stole from us? You tried to sell our neighborhood to your nephew? You lied to us. Catherine staggered backward. I leaned forward, lowering my voice just enough so only she could hear. You lost, Catherine. Her eyes burned with hatred. She opened her mouth to argue. But then, she saw the news camera. Because I had invited local reporters to cover the meeting. And now, everyone would know what she did. By the time the vote happened, it was unanimous. Catherine Monroe was officially banned from holding any future HOA position. By the next morning, she had packed up and left town. Her reputation? Ruined. Her power? Gone. And the HOA? Under new leadership. My leadership. Catherine Monroe was gone. Her reign of terror had ended in public humiliation, legal consequences, and a one-way ticket out of town. But now, it was time for the real work to begin. Because while Catherine was the face of the corruption, she had left behind a mess. A neighborhood buried in unfair rules, ridiculous fines, and a community too scared to trust anyone in power. So the question wasn't just how to fix the HOA. It was how to rebuild the trust Catherine had destroyed. The morning after Catherine left, I met with the new HOA board. We weren't in some fancy office. We weren't sitting behind a long, intimidating table like Catherine used to. We met at the community park, where real neighbors lived their lives. It was the first open meeting in years. And this time, everyone had a voice. I stood in front of them, holding up a stack of papers. This is what Catherine left behind. Unpaid contractor invoices for community maintenance, because Catherine had pocketed the money instead. Fake violation fees still sitting on people's accounts, totaling over $30,000 in wrongful charges. A secret HOA emergency fund, which had been used to pay for Catherine's backyard upgrades. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I tossed the papers onto the table. We're wiping all of it. A moment of silence. Then cheers. With Catherine gone, we did what the neighborhood had been waiting years for. We rewrote the rules. White heavy checkmark unreasonable vehicle limits? Gone. White heavy checkmark fines for minor landscaping violations? Erased. White heavy checkmark selective enforcement based on Catherine's personal grudges? Or, instead of a dictatorship, the HOA would become what it was supposed to be. A group that protected the neighborhood, not controlled it. For the first time in years, people actually felt safe in their own homes. 3 weeks after Catherine's departure, I was walking down the street when I spotted a moving truck. For a second, my stomach clenched. But then I saw who it was. Catherine's former inner circle. The people who had backed her for years, the ones who turned a blind eye to her corruption. They were packing up and leaving. And you know what? Nobody stopped them. They had ruled by fear. But now, fear didn't run this neighborhood anymore. 1 month later, the community had completely transformed. The playground, which had been neglected for years, was repaired using the missing HOA funds we recovered. We turned an empty lot into a community garden, where Catherine used to take yard violation photos. Families weren't scared to park in their own driveways anymore. And the best part? Property values skyrocketed. Because it turns out, people want to live in a neighborhood where they're treated with respect. Not like criminals for having an extra car. Not like targets for some HOA president's personal agenda. One day as I was sitting on my porch, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A familiar voice sneered on the other end. I hope you're happy, Carter. I smiled. Catherine, how's your new neighborhood? She let out a bitter laugh. Wouldn't you like to know? I leaned back in my chair. I heard you already got a parking violation. Silence. Then she hissed, You think you won? I chuckled. Catherine, I didn't just win. I made sure you can never do this again. She hung up. I stared at my phone for a moment before placing it back on the table. Game over. Later that evening, my daughter pulled into the driveway. Her used Honda parked right next to my work truck and my wife's SUV. No violation notices. No Catherine lurking with a clipboard. Just a family. Living without fear. I walked over to our new neighborhood sign, the one we had all voted on. Read. Welcome to Willow Creek Estates. A community built on respect, not control. I smiled. Because for the first time in years, this neighborhood finally felt like home.